This is 34-year-old Lukas McClish. Locals in his Boulder Creek, California community know him as Luke. Luke, the son of former Boulder Creek Fire Chief Kevin McClish, is an avid outdoorsman who grew up hiking in the Santa Cruz Mountains and beyond. So it wasn't unusual for him to head out on a short hike like the one he set out late on the morning of Tuesday, June 11th. While leaving his job site in Boulder Creek, Luke had the idea to hike about 3 hours to his next job in nearby Brookdale, where he had some spare clothes stashed. It was a relatively short hike, so he didn't bring much with him. All he had was pants, shoes, and a hat for clothing, and he carried a flashlight and a folding pair of scissors with him, but no cell phone or pocket knife. This was nothing new for McClish. He rarely carried his phone and certainly didn't think he'd need it on this day. Thus equipped, he finished up his landscaping job in Boulder Creek, slipped through a barbed wire fence, climbed a steep uphill through dense prickly shrubs, and emerged onto the rocky precipice where he would begin his journey. About an hour into his hike, Luke was having trouble getting his bearings. The CZU Lightning Complex fire in August 2020 had completely changed the landscape. Ordinarily, he'd use game trails and fire roads to get his bearings, but the fire had completely wiped many of these out. After about an hour, McClish came to the realization that he was lost. He kept hiking until night fell. Ordinarily, he would have built a lean-to to sleep in overnight, but lacking his camping materials, he had to improvise, which he did by finding a hollowed-out log. It was a cold night, and the dry duff had all been consumed by the fire, leaving only the wet stuff with no insulation properties. He spent a torturous night in and out of the log until sunrise. The following morning, Luke had still not found his bearings and could not tell which direction the road was in from where he'd ended up. The only food he'd brought was half of a bear claw left over from his breakfast the day before. He expected to see someone or hear some type of power equipment, but nothing and no one materialized. At one point he climbed to some houses, but they'd been burned in the fire in 2020 and were uninhabited. He made the decision to stay near the creek, rationalizing that at least he could subsist for a few days by drinking a gallon or more of water a day. "I've hiked many treacherous trails from up north in the Sierras to down south, and I never assumed our mountains were like that," he told the Santa Cruz Mountain Bulletin. "I didn't realize they could be so harsh. I've hiked these mountains many times, and I've never seen terrain like that. I just wanted to stay by the water." Meanwhile, he made larger and larger circles around the point he'd found, never straying too far from the water. He believed that he could make his way out if he really wanted to, following the path of the water. But Luke told the Daily Mail that it was a relief to just disconnect and be off-grid for a while. Without his cell phone, he was under no obligation to answer to anyone. He was enjoying himself. Until he wasn't. At some point on one of his walks, he became aware that he was being tracked by a mountain lion cub. He also said he was visited by what he imagined was the same screech owl that lived in the tree outside his house. He joked to the owl that at least it had found him, if no one else had. Now, did he really see these animals, or was he becoming delirious? I'll let you be the judge of that, but what's clear is that by the third day, he started to get pretty hungry. He found some wild berries to give him a bit of sustenance, but even with the gallon and a half of water he was catching in his boot and consuming each day at that point, it wasn't enough. He began going to bed dreaming of taco bowls and burritos from Los Gallos, a local taqueria. Luke's parents were used to not hearing from him for a few days, but the sixth day of his ordeal happened to be Father's Day, and when he didn't show up to family dinner, that's when his mom realized something wasn't right. She reached out to his friends and discovered that none of them had seen or heard from him in almost a week. Then his dad reached out to his friends in the Boulder Creek Fire Department, and the search began. While over 300 rescuers searched for Luke, led by the Sheriff's Department, it all very nearly came to a horrific end, when on his 9th day in the wilderness, he slipped 150 feet down an enormous boulder, triggering a rock slide. Bruised, malnourished, and now covered in rocks and dust, he began to wonder if he would ever make it back. Desperate, he began yelling out, hoping to catch the attention of someone. Anyone. One evening, a former firefighter stood at the edge of his own property overlooking Foreman Creek when he heard a faint cry for help. He called the Sheriff's Department, but they were inundated by a lot of other calls that were coming in. They were spending a lot of time, money, and effort following up on false lead after false lead in the McClish case. So they asked the Santa Cruz District State Park peace officers to assist. And when they arrived at the ex-firefighter's property, they could hear the yelling from the deck. They deployed drones which were equipped with a camera, speakers, and microphone. And one of these drones picked up a voice saying, "You are right above me." But when the drone asked the voice to say their name, there was no response. After a bit of urging from Luke's mother, they asked again, and a one-word answer came back to them: McClish. The SPPOs, along with CAL FIRE and Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Office personnel, descended the slope via the tributary creeks. Officer Brett Weber and his canine partner Rhino followed tracks leading up a steep slope. Moving away from the creek's noise, Weber eventually pinpointed the sound of the cries. Communicating unseen, he located McClish with Rhino's assistance. McClish, dirty, hungry, and tired, but otherwise unharmed, was provided with essentials while Weber radioed their location. Additional searchers soon arrived with provisions and escorted him to safety. The story had a happy ending as Lukas McClish made it out of the canyon after 10 days with only half a donut and a handful of berries. Or did it? Now, I have not personally done much hiking in this area, so I was pretty surprised while researching the video when I found a tweet casting doubt on McClish's story. This person says that the story made no sense. Boulder Creek is on Route 9 with highways just a few miles to the east and west. As someone who grew up hiking in these woods, McClish should have been able to walk east or west for a day or two at most. And then I came across a second tweet from someone who claims to have hiked all over Big Basin. This person says basically the same thing. If you walk straight in any direction, you should hit a road within a day or two. Even if he was disoriented, following the sun should have given him a general sense of direction, even if the creek itself did not. Now, once someone questioned it, the internet did what the internet does. It started throwing accusations around. One man said he also hiked those same trails for decades, saying it was, his word, impossible to get lost. On a side note, I love people who use someone's entire Twitter display name to reply to them. Dear Joey, master of wit and sarcasm. I love that. Good stuff. Of course, Luke walked on an unmarked trail that started behind a barbed wire fence, so it's unlikely this person hiked that same trail for decades, but is he right to question the official story? But it gets wilder. Here, someone who started their career as a search and rescue deputy in the Santa Cruz Mountains insists that the only people who got lost for more than a few days were injured or dead. Now, he goes on to state that McClish's hair appears recently shampooed. Now, I am clearly not an expert on shampoo, but it's hilarious to imagine that this guy went through this elaborate lie, losing his shirt, pouring dust all over himself, but just couldn't resist the masculine urge to shampoo his hair long enough to cover his tracks. I think you cracked the case. But then the initial tweeter replied with something that I think is absolutely insane. He said, "My buddy thinks he is a murderer, and this was his alibi." And then with a rolling on the floor laughing emoji. And this just doesn't sum up the internet in 2024. Accusing a man of murder with absolutely no evidence of any wrongdoing at all, except you don't think you would have gotten lost where he got lost. But then he follows it up with a laughing emoji. So, he's obviously just kidding. So it's a big deal, right? But this led me down a rabbit hole that uncovered a key piece of information that all of the official news stories seem to leave out. And that is that Luke McClish has albinism. So he had to stay under the canopy of trees or risk getting burned by the sun, especially with no shirt. And on top of that, at least according to someone who claims to have been a classmate of his, he is legally blind. Of course, that could explain how he had so much trouble navigating his way out once things went sideways. I've seen often enough how one or two small mistakes can have a domino effect. I once happened upon two Occidental College students who'd gotten lost on their way to a very popular waterfall and had to spend the night completely unprepared in Bear Canyon in Angeles National Forest. As my buddy Seth and I hiked them out along the Gabrielle Avenue Trail, we kept wondering how they'd managed to miss the crowds of people going to Switzer Falls. The truth is, sometimes shit happens in the woods, and no amount of Monday morning quarterbacking can really change that. So what do you think? Leave me a comment below telling me whether you think Luke McClish simply got lost and turned around in his own backyard after embracing the adventure of his situation for a few days, or whether you think he's a murderer with a shampoo fetish. Either way, thanks for watching, and hey, let's do this again sometime.